Well, firstly, I'd like to thank you all for coming today to the Tasmanian launch of Statements from the Soul, a collection of passionate essays by Australians of diverse religions, making the case for Indigenous constitutional recognition through a voice. I'm Sean Gordon. I'm the co-convener of Liberals for Yes. I'm also your MC today, and very pleased to be partnering with the Multicultural Australia for the Voice in co-hosting today's launch. My role as convener of Liberals for Yes has allowed me to travel right across this vast country of ours and to meet with key people to talk to them about the importance of recognising Indigenous people in the founding document of this country. From my experience, it is clear that there will be benefits if we listen to the voices of Indigenous communities, particularly in identifying practical solutions that work at the grassroots level. The meaningful recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Australia's Constitution through a voice to Parliament goes to the heart of Liberal values. It therefore gives me great pleasure to welcome the Premier of Tasmania, Jeremy Rockliff, to speak to us about his views on the constitutional recognition through a voice. Thank you, Premier.
Well, thank you very much, Sean, for that. It is my great pleasure, indeed, honour to be standing among you today and advocating for a yes for the voice on October the 14th, and I'll say a few words on that in just a moment. Alison, thank you very much for your welcome to country, as always. Meaningful and, of course, warming and embracing, and I appreciate it very much. To our co-editors, Dr. Shireen Morris and indeed Damien Freeman, for the opportunity I appreciate to launch this very, very important book, Statements from the Soul, the moral case for the Uluru Statement from the Heart. And in doing so, can I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land of which we meet today, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. I would also like to acknowledge and thank Uncle Rodney Dillon and Nick Cameron for their tireless work and co-design of the voice and their ongoing advocacy, of course, for a yes vote, but their ongoing commitment to Tasmanian Aboriginal people. And I would also like to acknowledge the incredibly important work done by countless individuals, Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians, on the design of the voice over the past decade. This has been some journey, the voice and the Uluru Statement of the Heart. Indeed, it's been some journey for our country and First Nations people, where back in 1901, our Constitution excluded Indigenous Australians, deliberately, in actual fact. And that is a cause of great need for reflection, but also great shame as well. And moving forward to, of course, 1967, and that very important referendum that did unite the country. But also all of our journeys when it comes to the knowledge and understanding of First Nation Australians, Indigenous peoples, Tasmanian Aboriginal people, and the heartbreak of their journey since not long ago, 235 years ago, in and around that time, of course, colonisation of Australia happened. And I want to thank all those that have been involved in continuing to unite the nation, from the many people that were signatories over days of work, I understand, Rodney, to the Uluru Statement of the Heart. But also I would like to thank the many people within the Australian Parliament, indeed, across various political spectrums. And I guess as I stand here in front of a banner, Liberals for Yes, it's really, I reflect also on the many people of my party that support and will vote yes on October the 14th this year. And this is just the yes, and the Uluru Statement of the Heart is not just something that we all found out about on the election night in, of course, the recent federal election. And it disappoints me somewhat that there has not been a greater bipartisan approach since that time, because it was bipartisan before that and indeed started back under a coalition government. And I pay tribute to Ken Wyatt and to Julie and Lisa, who still have worked so hard from a political point of view, and indeed continue to do so. But of course, their work pales into insignificance when it comes to Indigenous Australians that came together, united, and worked so hard in bringing and creating the Uluru Statement of the Heart. What better way to represent us as Australians than to vote yes on October 14th? And this is what this makes this book and contributions within it so very special. And we have here with me as well the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs in Tasmania, Roger Yench, who both of us, of course, had a very proud moment in 2016 when the Tasmanian Parliament united across all 40 members of independents and all sorts of political colours, of course, where we unanimously supported a change to Tasmania's constitution. And I know Rodney was there in the audience at the time, and I remember him sitting up there in the gallery listening to the discussion and the unity that all members of Tasmanian Parliament, as we supported that unanimous change to our Tasmanian constitution in recognising, of course, Tasmanian Aboriginal people as the first Tasmanians. And that the Tasmanian constitution now proudly declares that the Tasmanian Aboriginal people are Tasmania's first people, and they are the original owners of the lands and the waters. This book recognises the enduring spiritual, cultural, economic and social importance, of course, of our first Australians. And indeed, we all recognise, in terms of our local context, Tasmania's traditional lands and waters to the Tasmanian people. And we acknowledge their past and ongoing contribution to Tasmania. The inclusion of these words in our state's constitution was a moment of great unity for Tasmania, and something that we can be enormously proud of. What we need to ensure now is that First Nations people are recognised in the Australian Constitution through the establishment of a voice. I've listened to a lot of the discussion, informed myself along the way as well. This is a very modest proposal which has drawn support from across the political, cultural and religious communities across our great nation. It is a proposal that comes from First Nations people first and foremost. This is not born of politicians, state and federal, Labor, Liberal, Green, Independent, whatever persuasion you may well be. This is born of First Nations people. It's up to us as a country and as individuals within the country to listen and understand that this is something that has been brought to us. It's actually a gift that's been given to us in many respects from all that work a number of years ago. It is both fair and practical, which has benefited from the involvement of many, many people. It indeed celebrates who we are as Australians and acknowledges the special and important place the First Nations people hold within our nation. And reading through the book, and I've had advanced copies for some time as well. As Archbishop Peter Comensoli says in his contribution to the book, a voice is about walking together as Australians. It is both a spiritual commitment to reconciliation and a practical commitment to a better future. These hopes, of course, are also echoed by Indigenous leader Fiona Joes, who describes the voice as an invitation, again, for closer togetherness and inclusion. As she says, a First Nations constitutional voice will foster Indigenous responsibility and self-reliance, but not separatism or solitude. The voice is about acknowledgement, inclusion and listening. It is about listening to those that have lived here for over 65,000 years, longest continuing culture on our earth. And I've often reflected on that as all those many thousands and thousands of years, and the fact that European settlement, colonisation, just 235 years ago, we are but a dot on the landscape. But we have, of course, not covered ourselves in any glory in any way, shape or form when it comes to the support and the inclusion of our First Nations people. And while we can be enormously proud of what our First Nations people have achieved over the course of many thousands of years, but more recently in our known time, we have a long way to go. And it upsets me, it distresses me when we look at the educational attainment, the health and life expectancy, incarceration. We can do far better. And we have failed as a nation in many respects, despite the fact our Indigenous Australians have much, of course, to be proud of for their achievements. This rich culture is an integral part of our nation, and respecting and upholding this culture is an important part, to me, about what it means to be Australian. When First Nations delegates from around Australia gathered in Uluru in 2017, they asked the nation for a voice in their own affairs. Not too much to ask when you consider that. This was proposed so that good ideas and reforms proposed by First Nations people would be heard by those in positions of power. This is not a radical idea. Recognising and listening is not something that is incredibly radical or, outside the box. That's what we should all be doing every single day. For problems to be solved and opportunities seized, governments should be listening to those with first-hand experience, and a yes vote is that commitment to listening. It will allow First Nations to take greater responsibility, of course, in their own futures. It will enable grassroots to be heard and for more effective policies and laws to be developed through listening and consultation. It will acknowledge the special place that First Nations people hold in our nation and empower them to share and sustain their knowledge and culture, of which we can all and must all be incredibly proud. This is why I will be advocating for yes and continue to campaign, as I know Roger and many other of my colleagues in the Tasmanian Parliament of our political persuasion, of course, will do. I thank everyone here today, and we are represented by many people across Tasmania and many multicultural communities, and thank you for adding your voice to the yes case. Those that have contributed, I very much appreciate that. This is significant. This is really a great investment of your time. Great investment in your time, so we are able to, many of us, read the statements within this wonderful publication, gain a better understanding this will change people's views. And that's each and every one of our responsibility in this room and farther afield into October the 14th. We must encourage Tasmanians to learn, to listen, to understand, open our minds, but I think most importantly, open our hearts as well in the acknowledgement that we can do far better when it comes to supporting, including and understanding and ensuring the opportunities continues to increase for our First Nations people. So thank you very much for the opportunity to say a word. It's my great pleasure to launch the book today from my point of view, Statements from the Soul, a moral case. And that word moral is so important for the Uluru statement from the heart, and you all have my full support.
Just walking up and having a look at Liberals for years. It's a really important step for this state, but for our country, and I yearn for equality in this country. And I have a look around the room at the different people in this room and the unity that we want in this state. And we haven't totally got unity in this state, but with the government that we have today pushing for this unity, I think it's a great step. It's a great step forward for this state. But we need to be more than this state, because this is going to affect Aboriginal people all around the country. This is so important. It's probably the most important thing that I'll work on in my lifetime, and I've worked on a lot of important things, and this will be one of the biggest things that I've worked on, to have us recognised our invisible history behind us. And Jeremy, you talked of that amount of time. It's 700,000 full moons, or 2,500 generations underneath us. So thinking of that ancient history and thinking of unity, how we bring religious groups other from around the country together and unite and walk together with our hands out proud. We've started a bit with our walks on the bridge. We've done these steps, and we've taken major steps to get to where we are today. I can remember as a young boy that this place was different to what it is today. And I think that it's because of good people like yourselves, you and Roger, in the Parliament here, leading. We need leaders like yourselves to make these changes, because at the level, there's still a bit of resistance. And by having a book like yours talking about spiritual beliefs and about who we are, I think they're all steps that mature this country. This is an ancient country, but it's got a bit to go, and I feel that we are taking those steps and we're doing it right, and it won't be easy. There needs to be everyone in the room, everyone in this room is pretty much on board, but when we get outside this room, we need to convince other people that this is an important step, and I feel they're the steps that I want us to take as a state, to feel that unity and to feel that this is not a big thing. A voice to Parliament is just to give advice to the people that's making decisions who haven't made great decisions for our people in the past, and not with ill intent, but through not knowing. And I look around the room and wonder how many people was educated to say that we wasn't here. So I'm thinking of how we address that. I think that there's steps that we take, and the government haven't, and I'm very proud in Tasmania that the three major groups, it would have been easy for one group to fall out and say, no, we're not voting yes, but they didn't. So the Parliament in Tasmania is the most mature Parliament perhaps that we've got in the country, where the three groups have decided that they will work together to make this change, and they didn't have to, because they could have had pressure not to do that. So I'm just proud, as being a Tasmanian Aboriginal as well, that we've got our own state in order as far as politicians go, to want to make this important change to our future. I see we talk of poverty, we talk of homelessness, we talk of housing, we talk of all the employment, we talk of all these important issues, and these people will give advice on all those parts. And I think that that's going to be important for those people to give that information. And it's only going to be information to go ahead together. So I see that they're the important steps why I'm supporting a voice to Parliament. A voice to Parliament is to give advice to make change. And when it comes from our own people, the people that's affected by that advice, this is the step that's so crucial to take this forward. So that's my reasoning for that. And once again, I'd like to thank yourself, Jeremy, and Roger, for your unity to help support to make this change. And I just, like I say, I feel very proud to be a Tasmanian who's part of this. And your book, the importance of the spiritual soul, the ancient spirits that travel this land, is so important. And that book produces that and gives that some idea of that. So having people from diverse backgrounds, from where they've come from, the history, the truth of history, hopefully that we can make this a better place for us to go forward. We've seen some, Jeremy hinted on some of the dark past, but I think that we have a bright future. So I think that looking forward, looking back, that's a step for us to think about. Thank you.
So I do wear many hats, but I think they're many hats of the same thread. So I'm a member of the Uniting Aboriginal Islander Christian Congress, which was all about the spiritual stories that Rodney was talking about, and of the Uniting Church in Australia, and a proud Aboriginal woman from the rivulet. It's a pleasure to be able to speak with you all here this afternoon. I'm proud to be with you all, but there's something in your tequila, in your soul, in your heart that loves it when you're in a room with your own mob. So I'd like to recognise Rodney as in the room and part of the Smith family. We grew up in the rivulet together, and that's a whole other book we should share sometime, of stories that were handed down. So it's an honour to be here with you, and through us, an honour to be here and honour the life, legacy and advocacy of Fanny Cochrane-Smith. That woman is in my soul, and I know she would be proud of this time, of this space, of this place, and of this choice for voice. A voice we as proud Smiths, and someone mentioned it before, it's a gift to the nation, as her stories are a gift to us Smith mob. Through her, this opportunity to speak for our people, to unity, our voice for justice, and to work in the healing that is the unity of the yes vote in the referendum, is a once in a lifetime. Just to quote the President of the Uniting Church, and this blends in beautifully with our host today and with the launch of the book, who's a dear friend of mine as well, Reverend Sharon Hollis, and we can see the church has come a long way in recognition as well. This will be a protocol and powerful step forward which we can be proud of. I encourage all Australians to vote yes, not just in the referendum, but to healing and hope, because that's what this vote is about. I'd also like to read to you a snippet from Reverend Mark Kickett, who heads Noongar Budjak Wadjak Man from WA, who heads our organisation, and is the interim chair of the Uniting Aboriginal Islander Christian Congress, based on the spiritual stories of the lands now called Australia, present here, way before those big boats came in 1788. That I added that bit. That's not his bit. He says, the scriptures call us to be sincere with love, to live in harmony with one another. The invitation of the referendum is to do better at how we care for one another. So that's why we say yes. That how we care for and with each other, how we unite as one, is at the core of the referendum, and that's why I'm voting yes. This once-in-a-lifetime choice to be in the yes, the justice in the truth-telling, the activism and the advocacy. Because of Fanny Cochrane-Smith and my family, I'm able to continue the storytelling practices, the core cultural compass of who I am, who we are, as mob and as story, recorded story, and giving a voice to the recognition of First Peoples as traditional owners on the lands now called Tasmania. The yes vote is a vote from and with the heart, from and with the soul, and from and with the opportunity to connect and protect the voices of past with the voices now. Woven voices in the forever time. And what I would say, and I don't think I need to say it in this room, if not now, when? If not now, why not? Fanny's warriorship, her advocacy and activism, her voice in the souls of the Smith family encourages us to persevere. To this recognition of a voice in the year of the referendum. To say yes is to acknowledge the storytelling and the creator present in the lands now called Tasmania before 1788. We know the voices. I believe we are the voices. We carry the cultural voices, and this is for unity. This is to empower community. This is an opportunity not to divide, but to collectively gather a nation held in healing, hope and pride. To resonate with your beautiful storytelling in the book, this is a statement from the heart with the heart. Statements from the soul with the soul. Ngari Ninatu, which in my language means thank you. Thank you all for seeing, hearing, knowing and being in these stories. Echoing them across the lands, a voice for yes, for recognition of the oldest living culture on earth. Thank you for being warriors for the voices of justice, equality and equity that connect with and through each other. From my soul to yours, thank you. Treaty and truth-telling will be embedded in the voice, and it's woven in that. It's not separate to, it's not and/or. A voice for change, a voice for hope and healing. Ngari Nina Tu. From my family to yours, thank you.
Interesting that you mentioned Fanny Cochrane Smith, but in the museum there's a recording of her being the first Aboriginal woman in the country to be recorded singing her language. And when you think about voice, and to be able to have that recording sitting there of her voice, speaking her language, and being able to then sustain that into the future for your people today to be able to pick that up is truly amazing. That in pockets of our society there are these historic pieces of work that really connect us back to our country and to who we are as a nation. It was truly amazing to have that experience this morning, and I stood there for a while and listened to that, but also to know back then that she was recognised and acknowledged for those recordings and her contribution, not just to Tasmanian Aboriginal people, but to Aboriginal people right across this country. I'd like to call up our next speaker, Dr. Shireen Morris, and also acknowledge Dr. Damien Freeman for their major contribution to this work. I've been proud to work with these people now for well over a decade. We started this journey of Indigenous constitutional recognition and really pleased to be a part of this launch, continuing to build onto this. But like everything, it is a book sale, so you need to make sure that you're buying the book. And you're really taking this with you, because I do believe that this will become an historic part of this journey that we've been on.
What an amazing honour to have so many insightful and wise people engaging with Damien and my collection of essays. And I want to acknowledge, where are you, Damien? Worked together with Damien for almost 10 years now. It's been a long journey, so thank you for all your work working with me to pull this collection of essays together. And thank you, Liberals for Yes and Multicultural Australia for the Voice for organising this event, and Sean, Alison, Uncle Rodney for your galvanising comments. Most importantly, I really want to thank you, Premier, for your inspiring remarks, for engaging so thoughtfully with our collection, and for showing true principle in advocating a yes vote in the upcoming referendum. That's leadership. So this is not an election. This referendum is a vote of the Australian people. The referendum asks us a moral question, which only the Australian people can answer. Do we choose to finally recognise Indigenous peoples in the Constitution, through a substantive constitutional promise and enduring constitutional commitment that their voices will always be heard in laws and policies made about them? That's the question we've got to answer. The moral imperative, which this book speaks to, is really clear. Indigenous peoples lived on this continent for thousands of years before the British ships arrived, and long before the Muslim Makasan seafarers were trading sea cucumbers with the first Australians in the 1500s, as Sheikh Wessam Chakawi writes in his essay in our book. Surely it's time that Indigenous people were included in the Constitution from which they were wrongfully omitted in 1901. But the practical imperative is equally clear. Indigenous people have asked to be recognised not through a merely symbolic preamble, which Australians overwhelmingly rejected in the referendum of 1999, which experts like Julie and Lisa warn would be legally dangerous and ill-fitted to our practical and pragmatic constitutional rulebook, and, most importantly, which Indigenous Australians have consistently rejected in favour of empowering and practical constitutional reform. Instead, through an unprecedented national consensus, culminating 100 or more years of Indigenous advocacy, Indigenous people asked for practical recognition through a constitutionally guaranteed voice in their affairs, so that when politicians in Canberra and other capital cities make laws and policies about Indigenous communities around the country, those politicians and bureaucrats at least need to hear the advice of those communities so that better policies and better outcomes can flow. So a yes vote would be a national constitutional commitment to partnership, dialogue, listening, mutual respect. That commitment, I believe, could be a game changer that over time will help Australia close the gap. So this referendum is about delivering practical recognition in the liberal and conservative tradition. And indeed, the concept benefited from engagement with constitutional conservatives like Lisa and others. So this demonstrates that this is not about Labor or Liberal. It's not about left or right. It's about right and wrong. This is a moral question which should be above politics. And I think what's inspiring about this collection of essays is that many faith groups really understand the moral imperative here. Statements from the Soul showcases how Catholic, Anglican, Jewish, Sikh, Hindu, Muslim Australians and others are transcending their differences of belief and traditions and uniting behind a yes vote. And it's deeply of personal pride to me, as an Australian of Indian background, that several of the essays showcase unique migrant and multicultural perspectives on the moral imperative at stake. Many multicultural Australians feel deep empathy for the plight of Indigenous people. Many of our parents and grandparents came here with very little. We worked hard to achieve success and prosperity, but we know the history. We know that this country, which we love so much and has given us so much opportunity, was in a large part built off the back of Indigenous losses. As Chief Justice Brennan wrote in his Mabo judgment, Indigenous dispossession underwrote the development of the nation. This referendum might be our only chance as migrants and descendants of migrants to truly give back to Indigenous people, to stand in solidarity with them in achieving the modest and practical recognition they seek. So I commend the contributors of this essay collection, and I commend the Premier for your commitment to a yes vote, because at the end of the day, this is really up to us. Ordinary Australians are going to have to persuade each other to say yes to the generous offer that Indigenous people have made. And it's up to us to have these conversations in our synagogues, churches, temples and mosques, in our community groups, in our workplaces, sporting clubs, and in our homes. We've each got to take personal responsibility for the outcome of this referendum, and success is attainable. We've got 6 weeks to spread our message of friendship, unity, and hope. 6 weeks to ensure that the generosity and compassion of Australians is stronger than the forces of division and fear. So let's do all we can. And it brings me so much pride to see such a multicultural gathering here today. So thank you all for standing in solidarity with Indigenous Australians. Thank you.